And good evening, everyone. It's a quiet Sunday night here in Bendigo, Victoria, Australia. I just want to, first of all, I'd like to pay my respects and acknowledge the elders of the first people of this land, the Dja Dja Wurrung, of the elders past, present, and future, and recognise that their struggle is a part of the overwhelming class struggle, the struggle against capitalism and imperialism. Well, it's been one hell of a week. I've been actually working flat out. Just hadn't had time to do any live. So yesterday, actually, I couldn't do my regular Saturday morning live. I was actually off at a dental appointment around about 10:45, so I wasn't able to be around for that. So I do apologise for the late live today. We did a great live this today at 12 with Dus James. Excellent discussions we had about China, what's happening in India, and what's happening around the world as well. So once that's up and loaded, I believe it's up and loaded on Dus James's YouTube channel. Excellent one. And I watched Caleb Morpin an hour later, and that was an excellent live chat he did as well. I've just been on a Zoom meeting with a couple of comrades, just discussing about from the Centre of Political Innovation. And anyway, I think actually one of the things that's come out of this week in the news, and this is what I want to talk about just directly for tonight, specifically tonight, is industrial relations reform. Now, Christian Porter has now highlighted what changes he wants put into industrial relations. Now, the 5 points he's looking at is greenfields agreements, enterprise agreements, casual and fixed-term employees, compliance and enforcement and award simplification. These are some of the things that he's looking at changing even further. And I will say the legislation won't be really good for us working class people. I think they'll be looking to intensify these taxes more. First of all, I want to start with the Greenfields Agreement. For those of you who are not really familiar with industrial relations, especially for those of you who are overseas and not familiar with the Australian industrial relations scene, we have what we do. We have awards, which is your basic underpinning minimum wage and conditions. All right, it's in a book. The awards have been around with us for well over 100 years. They were actually used to form the basic wage. They've been, I think, with us since 1909 with the famous Harvester decision and made by Justice Higgins, and realised that we needed a wage safety net generally across the board for all workers. Well, from there, as the 20th century moved on, awards improved, a lot of excellent conditions won. I put in there 38-hour week was a classic point. Next year will be 40 years of that, and some awards a 35-hour week, and other great wins we won, like annual leave, 4 weeks annual leave loading of 17.5% of your ordinary earnings, and other penalties, etc. So that's what's coming about that. Now, a lot of workplaces no longer pay award wage. Actually, what they pay is for an enterprise agreement. A lot of enterprise agreements are created by union members and their respective union organisations for those individual sites. Some do cross a few businesses like construction, and in industries such as construction, very similar, same rates right across the board. That's what you call as an enterprise agreement. Now, they're talking about Greenfields Agreement. A Greenfields Agreement usually is one that's negotiated prior to a project starting, a big construction project, and they'll dictate the terms and conditions for that project for those workers. Well, what the Attorney General and Industrial Relations Minister Christian Porter has outlined, there'll be a focus on establishing enterprise agreements for the life of the mining, oil and gas projects. Now, this will, which have traditionally been limited by the structure of the system. Obviously, the federal government's expressed some support to this. Obviously, they want to see a project, so an agreement that covers the entire life of the project. Doesn't matter if it goes for 1 year, doesn't matter if it goes for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and so on. That agreement will cover it. Now, what the problem you got there for the workers, though, if they want to make improvements for the conditions on that particular project or the industry, they're not legally able to do so anymore. They are now stuck within that. Thing is, not just the federal governments, they're the servants of big business. They saw how for one, some improvements we've gained through those industries, such as the shorter roster. Now, when I was an organiser in Western Australia in the Pilbara, we were in the height of a very important campaign of developing a shorter working roster for working class families for those workers on those projects. And it actually became a social issue. Now, for those of you who want to know about the roster system, traditionally, a lot of projects were working a 4 weeks on, 1 week off roster. Now, that was a pretty hard life because there were certain mental health issues that contained with it, especially if you're from the eastern states flying to Western Australia. And the only way to get there, you board your flight in the capital cities here on the eastern states, fly to Perth, change over there, and then fly up to the very respective projects anywhere in the Pilbara. And this one happened to be Barrow Island. I was involved in. And I can say this, we had a really good campaign around the shorter roster. The campaign didn't start there, that started off on other projects, but I won't comment on them all the time. It was a perfect opportunity from a Form 1 roster to develop 20 days on, 10-day off roster. This allowed a lot more rest period with the immediate family, friends and community at large. And as I said, it's also a social issue as well, because there were a lot of marriage breakdowns. A lot of workers couldn't see their families as much as they would like. They paid a big price. Yes, they were getting paid higher wages, but look, wages can't buy your love at the end of the day. It can't buy your life overall. It doesn't buy relationships. And that part, the part that drives us that makes us a communal animal, was it's taken away from us. And the problem is you couldn't develop that within the campus because they kept shifting everyone around in a system they called motelling. So you didn't have the one set room you were accommodated to. You moved around consistently every time you came back to site. And at the time you did have off, it wasn't enough time to actually enjoy. It goes very quick. And if you wanted to catch up with friends and people you haven't seen for a while, well, they're obviously working or doing other things. So that was a little, to a point, certain loneliness. And there were suicides, a lot of suicides in that industry, unfortunately. I won't get into the whole detail, but it certainly is quite a tragedy as well. But it is a proper social issue, a working class issue. So it wasn't just merely industrial issue. Now, on that, we had a lot of agreements expiring in that particular year, 2014-15 period, on the Barrow Island project, the Gorgon project at the time. Chevron's was the client company that wanted that was requiring a big gas plant built there for the Gorgon gas field. Now, this was the perfect time to actually, we could see that the agreements were all starting to line up. And well, of course, the demand was for a 20 days on, 10-day off roster. We had the opportunity to go for it. Now, it was a hard bargain. There was a lot of campaigning. There was a lot of education we had to do to a lot of, even current union members, but potential union members. But when push came to shove, that we had the opportunity to take legal industrial action. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And we did so. And we were about on the verge to it, where the companies came back at the last minute in the early hours of one morning at 12:30 in the morning, called the union secretaries and addressed all the officials, fly up first thing in the morning. We're having a mass meeting, and they agreed to, okay, it wasn't 20 days on, 10 days off. It was 23 days on, 10 days off, but it was still a good win. It was still quite successful. A lot of people, overwhelming majority of the workforce, agreed to that in principle. Before it went out to an official vote, everyone was happy and everyone was quite relieved. And months down the track, when they introduced that roster, workers even commented to myself and many others that they noticed the difference. They had a lot more quality time at home with their with their immediate family and friends. They noticed that they can have 2 weekends to themselves, so they're around with their kids and around going to certain social functions and things that we just normally take for granted, but actually enjoy. They can actually have a life outside of work. The money wasn't so much to them. They already earned big enough wage every year, so that was vitally important, that social time, and it was a good win. But that was the eligibility, because there's no actual legislation and stuff. You have to have a agreement that covers the lifetime of the agreement. Sure, their companies have learnt their lesson from that. That was just one. There's many little gains, but that was a very important gain. I was actually I have to admit, I was quite proud to be part of that. I was right in the middle of all that campaign, and it was something to always hold I'll keep my head up high about it, Blake. And it was an important issue, but everyone involved in that achieved an important result, and that was because of the ability to do so. But what the Greenfields Agreement would do now under this proposal would not allow that to happen. They already have the terms and conditions. So goodbye to a shorter roster. They'll turn around and say, right, you're back to 4 weeks on, 1 week off. And many other things that will throw into it. So the workers are locked in for that time, which will cause problems again. So that gives you one example. But if the workers want to take action, do a campaign to have something different, well, they won't legally be able to. In fact, if they take action, they'll be up for massive fines. When I said protected action, that's protected action if it's granted by the Fair Work Commission after bargaining in good faith. What happens? That's when they can legally take industrial action within a period of 30 days. It can be extended after a 30-day period. It's the only time. But if any other time they try to, it's regarded as unlawful industrial action, which can open them up for massive fines. So this is where they're obviously looking at employers have sniffed the win on this and said, no way, we want to lock it in pronto, because all they care about is their profit. That's what they're pursuing for. They want the plant. There's billions of dollars at stake here, and they want their profit out of this, regardless of what the workers' lives and what the workers want and think. It doesn't matter. It's what they want, not them. Now, the other one the enterprise agreement's making, which I've had a look at this as well. They're talking about they'll re-examine the Better Off overall test, BOOT system. Now, that actually is making sure that the BOOT system comes in place, that no worker is supposedly worse off or undermines any award, etc. But they're suggesting the BOOT test is something that needs to have a really, really fine look at, because the way it's been applied at the moment is causing fewer and fewer enterprise agreements to be concluded. I wonder why. Now, the Better Off overall test has previously been highlighted as an area in need of reform by key business and industry groups. Now, these industry groups are comprised of employer organisations such as the Australian Industry Group, the Business Council of Australia, the Chamber of Mines and Chamber of Minerals and Mines, and AMA, which is another one, Australian Mines and Minerals Association, the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, all these big employer groups. I've been pushing this for so long. They want to now change it to the formerly no disadvantage test. Now, that can mean a lot of things as well. They might actually roll all your rates and conditions into one encompassing flat rate and saying, well, you're actually not disadvantaged. This is all we rolled in there. They now have to give a summary breakdown what's in that either. There's a lot of loopholes, I'm led to believe, and this is going to cause a lot of source exploitation, especially on workers on lower incomes. But you can be on a high income and still be exploited where in such a way they're saying, well, you're not disadvantaged at all through this agreement. And obviously, way I've interpreted so far, and I'm happy to be proven wrong. I'll say this while it's going live, I'm happy to be proven wrong, but workers will just generally will have no say in some of the agreement making. What they basically want to do is fast track EBAs to go through to be approved by the Fair Work Commission. And there could be conditions in, or not conditions, but writing in that there'll be basically a big disadvantage to workers. And they say no disadvantage. It's not just a matter about what the worker's getting in their pocket every week, but other terms and conditions that could completely undermine the worker's basic rights and basically give the employer full control. There's a few nasty things behind that. The other one, they get casual and fixed term employees. Now, what a lot of employer groups are jumping up and down about this. There was a win last year in relation to the CFMU Mining Energy Division taking on a labour hire company called WorkPac, and it was called the WorkPac versus Scheme decision case. Now, this worker working for WorkPac, a big labour hire company, a big, huge supply of labour to the mining industry, they pursued a claim that casual, even though he was having a loading, because he was long term there, employed as a casual. Well, it broke the definition of what a casual was under the National Employment Standards. So, in fact, the union won the case of pursuing annual leave, sick pay, and other conditions that full-time employees enjoy. Now, casual in Australia here receives a loading on top of the base ordinary rate of 25% loading, and that was in lieu of any type of annual leave provisions, sick pay, etc., to come so-called cover that for a period of time. But a casual, under a definition under the National Employment Standards, is supposed to be basically talking about ad hoc employment. So a casual is employed maybe for 2 weeks while another worker's off. You could be on holiday, or it could be the casual could be employed for 2 months because their particular worker is off on long service leave. So, and the employer needs to have an amount of labour there out at the workplace in order to keep production going. Well, what's happened over the years, it's been exploited where people have been basically casual for years and not in any of the conditions that are enjoyed by full-time workers. So that's why this was pursued. It was won in the High Court. And now, obviously, the Industrial Relations Minister indicated the working group could be looking at a range of known problems, including problems associated with the definition of casual employment. So they're looking to change that. And that gives what the concern here, that will give the employers the ability to put long-term casuals back in place, where we're trying to get on top of. As soon as we grab a win, they want to take it off us. And that's always keep in the back of mind under a capitalist system. What we've gained now will always be taken off us. And so this is where that's looking at. Next one's compliance and enforcement. This is around about wage theft. I'll read it out what this says. The federal government has reportedly drafted a bill to criminalise serious forms of wage theft. Sounds good. Okay. The working group established to examine compliance and enforcement will examine options including banning directors from boards of those companies which underpay workers, stopping the company from employing migrant workers, and displaying a notice about the company's breach. Unions have indicated they believe the federal government may set the bar too high for a serious form of wage theft. Now, what that entails is if employers wish to rip their workers off, not pay them out completely their entitlements or what they're entitled to during while they're working there, and also to abusing the migrant visa system, where if there's a supposed shortage of labour, skilled labour, they can apply for a 457 visa that to boost their productivity, basically to boost their productivity. But we all know that's been rewarded as well. The problem we got there with this compliance and enforcement, what is going to be the devil in the detail? Yes, they might have certain things that, yes, they'll have to address, and it might be some little win with one there as well. There's also going to be a lot more devil in the detail further on. And I wouldn't be all surprised, and this is why I'm interpreting it at the moment, and once again, I'm happy to be proven wrong, that a union, if it wants to pursue a wage theft claim, his shield claim will have to jump through all these loopholes and prove the fact that the employer has been obtaining money or rates and allowances, conditions, etc. And what happens if the employer goes bankrupt or supposedly bankrupt? Because what happens here in Australia, and no doubt it probably happens around the world, the employer, the business, sets up a shelf company and moves those employees over to the shelf company. So the shelf company is not getting income. But if something goes wrong, those employers, the problem is we cannot pursue it. Well, it's harder to pursue those entitlements or to pay out if the company goes bankrupt. And all they have to do, declare bankruptcy or insolvency, and then they can the next day start up another business under a different name. So this is going to be an interesting bit of the part of legislation that'll be worthwhile. We'll keep an eye on as well. But this is also some passion of mine as well, award simplification. Now, I just spoke about awards. Just a brief history about it. Now, we've seen in the last 30 years award simplification, and it's been accelerating now for definitely to the last 10 years, to say the least. Now, it wasn't about making making industrial relations easier. It's actually been about ways we can strip conditions off us altogether. And I'm proud to say, I've said this, I'm now dealing with issues where for years, workers have been entitled to certain conditions and now no longer, because this is what it says in the new awards. This is what the definition means. So the definitions of many of the clauses have changed in the last 40 years. And this is a very big concern about award simplification. Well, basically what they want to do is make the awards so gutted that it basically weren't worthwhile. So we just wind up having to fight for contract after contract or agreement after agreement to be underpinning for us. And that's a worrying trend. So I'll read what this said out. The federal government has proposed to introduce award simplification changes. It's not like they're already there anyway. With an initial focus on simplifying a small number of awards in distressed industries as a result of COVID-19. Attorney General and Industrial Relations Minister Christian Porter has named these industries as retail, hospitality, restaurants and tourism. And some of the most exploited workers work in those industries. They pay low rates, piecemeal rates, a lot of abuses there, exploiting workers. Even if they have good rates and conditions too, mind you, we're still exploited, make a profit. But these are ruthless industries, believe it or not. Yes, mining can be, construction can be, and any other industry, you name it. However, these are some of the lowest paid workers around, and then they want to simplify these awards in distressed industries. So God help those workers if they want to try and advance their conditions, and then a lot of certain things are already protections are taken off them. This is a very big concern. So this is why it's important that we just keep in the back of our mind what's happening here. Now, I can sit here all night and explain, complain, explain how bad it all is. We all know it's bad. Let's make it no surprise to it all. We should be asked all these two things. Why does this happen in the first place? Why do we have aggressive industrial relations reforms in the first place? It's there, first of all, to maintain capitalist class rule and to keep profits growing. All right? We live in a capitalist system. It's not our system as workers. It's a capitalist system. When we've heard people say it's our economy, wrong again. It's not our economy. It's a capitalist economy owned by the capitalists, the big businesses of the world. They own it. Governments are there to manage it on their behalf. They also put legislation in place to protect profit and to help maximise profit as much as possible. Because understand, under capitalism, a capitalist or a group of capitalists, whatever, capitalism must seek further and further profit. And the way they do that most ultimately is the exploitation of labour. Now, they're obviously seeing at a very good point, and John just wrote here, they're using the COVID-19, the situation with the pandemic, as a great excuse because we're unable to mobilise at the moment to try and ram through certain legislation. They're using that at the moment as the advantage to try and use this as an advantage point. But let's see, first of all, why and how they go about it. Now, I've explained this in previous videos, and I did one today about how profit is made. So let's look at A. I'll note up this again. A means all the materials, machinery, the factories in there to make the particular commodity. B is us, workers or labour, that makes that particular makes the particular commodity. C is the finished product, which is the commodity. Now, a product or a commodity is a product that is not for our own use, but is made for exchange, and this time for money. So let's have a look. We'll make A 100, B 100, which equals C 200. So 100 is the costs of all the materials, the raw materials, the machinery, the computers, even the technology in that to make the commodity. B is the labour, another 100. It costs how much labour it's going to cost to make the commodity. And it makes the final cost. Now, where does the capitalist make profit? Well, profit is not realised until the commodity or commodities are sold. And if they're not sold, well, obviously the capitalist can't make money, nor can he pay for A and B. But say you sold it, okay? It can be any type of commodity, like it could be fruit, vegetables. It could be, we'll just make widgets, and for example, so 200, so you sold all these widgets, well, widgets are made, 200 they cost. Found that, capitalist has got to pay A 100 to cover that cost, and for 100 of the workers. Now, where he extracts it, the surplus value and profit is from here. So he'll give 50 to the worker and take 50 for themselves. So the worker is, in fact, not getting paid the full, well, the labour is not being paid the full value of what they're worth and what the labour they created, right? They only paid half that. Next year might be paid 25 and then paid 75. And on top of that, I did a little talk today, even further where they increase the profit margins here. They add They might add it up to 50. So the capitalist may take 50 from the worker and grab 50 for another, top of that, another 50 for himself. It makes 100. This is where inflation comes in. I want to do a talk on inflation on another video, so I want to talk about tonight. But anyway, I'm going a bit too far there at the moment. Just going back to what I was saying there. That is the basic form of our surplus value is extracted and into made our profits realised. That's where it comes from, and that shows you just the basic form of capitalist production. Marx and Engels, especially Marx, really done a lot of material on that as well. So this is what's happening here. What they're trying to do is find out a further way they can exploit workers further to extract more profit, more surplus value, stopping them the inability to take industrial action if they need to pursue their claim. Because when a worker goes on strike, what happens? When a worker goes on strike, withdraws their labour, what happens? Surplus value and is not created, and profit cannot be realised. You've actually taken that off the capitalist such a way. So the capitalist class has seen this, and especially, for example, maybe a big engineering company's got the contract to build a brand new oil and gas plant there, somewhere out in Western Australia, Queensland, Northern Territory, doesn't matter. Could be anywhere. Multi-billion-dollar, could be hundreds of billions of dollars. And that's a lot of money on that stake. And why they're going to extract as much profit out as possible? Well, making sure those workers don't take any form of action at all. And what we ought to be doing is having a look at how we're going to be developing strategy. So I think we've got to get back to it. It's the capitalist system itself as it's creating this mess, and they're trying to find further and further way to extract us. Now, let's talk about a strategy. How are we going to move forward? How are we going to move forward? What's the strategy? Now, complaining about it on social media is not going to help. We can complain and talk about these things how long. Petitions can hurt maybe some use at times, but really by rights. The federal parliament's got a mind made up and just control both houses. That legislation's going through and becomes law. So what do we do? How are we going to mobilise? How are we going to develop an effective strategy? Well, first of all, that's got to be down at the start of the discussion. How are we going to develop a strategy? I know I've seen more comments about making strike action, general strikes and that. But look, let's face it, 15% of the whole entire workforce here, I think it's 15%, round about that mark, give or take, of the entire workforce here in Australia is unionised. The rest are not. So how are we going to win the rest of those workers over for the struggle? There's no point 15% going out in a general strike and then the rest of everyone turns up to work. What's that going to create? We need to have maximum unity to do such action. And how are we going to lead up to a general strike? So this is where we have to develop a good industrial strategy moving forward, because what's up against for workers are big banks, governments, which backs governments. So we've got finance, governments, law, everything. The whole superstructure is going towards the workers. So we need to think about a good strategy around this, how to beat this legislation. Yes. Now, the 1960s were actually a good classic case in point. There was a strategy around it. It wasn't just all of a sudden Clario jailed as General Secretary of the Tramway Union was jailed and everyone was just out on strike like that. It was a complete strategy leading up to it to beat the penal powers at the time. So there's some good lessons to learn from that. Do we copy that? No, not exactly, because we live in a different era. And you're right, Jay, there is about 250 million people out on strike at the moment. We did some talks today on myself and Dustin James about that. There's a lot more coming out, but very well organised too. That started with the farmers over there because the Modi government wanted to take the land off them and basically give it to the multinationals. So they're now organised, well organised, and they marched on New Delhi, and now the unions and the respective communist parties over there leading this as well. But the centre of India trade unions have obviously been central to organising that. So 250 million, yes, the largest strike in human history, you're correct there. So it's quite interesting. I don't have too much information on it, but I would recommend look to the World Federation of Trade Unions and also the Centre of Indian Trade Unions as well. We've got some information about that if you want to look for more. Obviously, over the next few days, there'll be some more information coming out of that. But that's because they're highly organised as well, and it was a really good job what they've done so far. Can we pull that off here? Look, we can, but how are we going to go about it? So this is going to be developed. We do need to develop a strategy, a way forward. I think the first things first, we need to talk to the non-union sector, or the non-union workers, and say, look, this is the situation we're really in. Now, the question we do we want to continue on like this, or do we want to actually start generally trying to find a way forward? Now, we are up against a lot of other objectives too. A lot of workers are in debt up over their heads. Got a mortgage to pay off. Well, there are other things to pay off in life. And if they lose their job, that can really completely destroy them financially. So they're up on all of these. They're up against these things every day. So how are we going to win them out? Now, there's also the media blackout for those strike. Yes, I did notice, and they're using all this outrage towards China. And that at the moment, I do agree. Yes, they're trying to deflect all our attention. Also, what they're doing, John, sorry, not Joe, you've got John Doe there. What they're actually doing is deflecting our attention away from not just about the war crimes,